I'm at the park here in Tbilisi. Before I turned the video on, it said there's 190 other people online. And so, I've got over 2,000 people here on Facebook. And so if there's 190 online, it'll be interesting to see at this time of the evening, which is, I think, approaching 8 p.m. here, or 2000 hours. It's the hour before that, within the hour before that. So if this is showing there's 190 people online on my Facebook, what I'm wondering is how it works when it's set to a public setting, if that includes that number, if it's just friends that happen to be online. So anyway, so 190 people, if we understood it right. And in total this year, sales for me on internet since about November have been almost it's been the worst ever. So sales in total have just been terrible. But here in the end, what was happening in June and July here as a journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, getting invited to these events and then telling, the people at, high-level officials of Europe, USA, and Georgian government that the Georgians direct, that I believe that are being taken advantage of, that this issue with NATO membership, because it was the Bucharest, 10 years later, it was that topic. And that's basically what I had said. And then to go to the Meet the Ambassador event, which was exactly on the NATO summit, July 12th, the same timing. So we have our U.S. diplomat there from the U.S. Embassy. We have NATO summit taking place with Trump and other leaders in Brussels. Same date. So then you have like 5 different people that are telling me, NGO, former Georgian Air Force, and a local American businessman, another Georgian through Facebook, and maybe another, there's another one. So there's at least 5 different people that were saying, look, Russians are also on Facebook. And I mean openly on Facebook, not just to me. But I was tagged in, and to that post where they were saying that the Russian military was going to be taking Kota, the village. So all this is going on, and I had to wonder, is it because where these people sent, because these things, quite frankly, in Georgia are happening ongoing, where they sent as a part of a psyops, knowing that as a journalist I would report that, and that I would post that I would talk about that on Facebook or YouTube, where sometimes I post videos like this from live stream, which I've now also started an account with Real Video, which was started by Mike Adams, the health ranger over at naturalnews.com. Because of the censorship, shadow banning, shadow blocking, and throttling by big internet tech companies, which are alleged in some cases to be leftist, though I have a feeling that an article that I saw, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is also tagging now some independent journalists or media sites as with something like extremist views or something like this. But in any case, so here's a handful of people saying the same thing from different sources in different places, saying, Michael, we're frustrated. The EUMM, European Union monitoring mission in Georgia, they're spending more time at the restaurants than out on the border, the so-called occupation border. They're not reporting near as much as what's really happening out there, with Georgians being illegally detained, with land further being taken under military wire, under occupation. So in all of this, there's at least 5 different people, plus in public on the internet, about the village Kota. So I brought those questions to the Foreign Ministry in a letter July 10th. And again, this is all happening right up to the NATO summit. And so one had to wonder, was it a well-organized psychological operation, or was it just, hey, these topics are coming to the fore, and or is it provocation on the other side of the fence here, so to speak? The other side has routinely been accused of moving the border and provoking Georgia on visits, on the timing of visits from U.S. Congress, on the timing of U.S. involved or NATO involved military exercises. They really have done provocations. So it's hard to know in conflict scenario if one or another side or both are engaging in provocations for whatever reasons. Maybe it's a so-called punishment operation, or like one former Georgian soldier in the war was a prisoner of war, actually, tortured and his organs removed and all that stuff in the occupied area. And so that's not clearly that's that's a provocation, to say the least, to say the minimum. So these things are happening where you've got one side saying this, but it's the timing that was suspect, because it's right before the summit. So then my questions get answered. It takes about a little more than 2 weeks. It depends on the timing, if we can say 2 weeks, because I was referred over to the State Security Services of Georgia, and those 6 questions were answered by Georgian State Security Services. Around the 30th or 31st of July, I received a reply, and that was when Noble Partner 2018 multinational military exercises had begun. And the media day, I know for sure, for journalists to enter, because I had applied to get in, started on August 1st. And I didn't get an answer on press accreditation from U.S. Army Europe. They had initially answered and said, hey, we're going to put that application for your press accreditation over to the Georgia Ministry of Defense when I get over there. Josh at PR, U.S. Army Europe, answered that for Noble Partner 2018. I never heard anything back after that, and from U.S. Army Europe, and then I had contacted George and the act, and there was no answer given, really. So at that time, at 5 p.m., I put in the letters to U.S. Senator Roy Blunt's office and Senator McCaskill's office saying, as I had said on July 18th in letters then, that because I was trying to put this off because I already felt to do it. You've got a lot of bullshit happening here, quite frankly, just to cut it to the chase, make it simple. A lot of bullshit that shouldn't be happening on American money, well financed by American money, and so through U.S. aid and through more per capita given in U.S. aid to this place than any other place on earth, any other nation in the world. So then I had said on July 18th I would be not active with the project until further notice, and so then, but there's no press accreditation. And you've got Senator Roy Blunt's letter to me back on February of 2018 saying, would like you to have your insights, would like for you to support NATO and our allies. Georgia's an official ally of the U.S., or considered officially an ally of the U.S. And so here we are, and I don't get an answer to get into the same multinational military exercise that I'd filmed the year before. So at that time, at 5 p.m., July 31st, 2018, from Tbilisi, I had faxed the letters over saying that I permanently quit and stopped giving support to that. I'm done with the project, and that I might go on and do whatever journalism, basically, that I feel to do, or maybe even if I'll have time or take time to do it in the future. But in all purposes, I'm done with the project that I was asked to do by the Georgian Ministry of Defense. Katuna Polari, an advocate, a lawyer for the Ministry of Defense of Georgia, back in 2013. So it helped, in fact, one of a couple of main ideas regarding the project specifically she took and put content to that. And on a personal note, she had gotten over to the United States successfully and is still there, as I understand, based on my advice. So now in that situation, you have the scenario where, you can't continue to do that in full when you don't get access, which is directly against what one of the senators had asked for in the first place. And I had gotten a letter from Claire McCaskill back on April 23rd to a letter I'd sent over in December, response to that. And so I went ahead and wrote her. I've also visited her office over the years about that project. Then I'm seeing a trend in the U.S. news about these internet tech companies and about the government in general. More censorship, more negative rhetoric about journalists, about media in general. And there's the news that I'd seen today of all the things. There's like millions of things you can see on Facebook, and this one is queued up there. Happens to be at the top of the news feed, and it's out of Australia, allegedly by a Facebook corporate person telling the Australians basically that if you're a journalist, we want to help support you. If you're media, we want to help build the community and support media and journalists as much as we can, but if you're not cooperating with us, then basically your business will be like, you'll be something like with your hand being held in hospice, which is nearly the analogy of a death threat. Because hospice are the people that take care of you when you're on your way out, when you're on your deathbed. So if that story has any truth to it at all, I don't know. It can be a bullshit. This term fake news has been floated about so much, which in this case it was listed here on Facebook. And further into the story, further into that news article, they had denied, the so-called Facebook corporate person had denied saying that, but at the same time the article stated that Facebook refused to release the actual text of the meeting, the actual minutes, the actual text of the meeting. So that it's kind of like, well, here's what the story is. They've basically threatened journalists and media. Facebook has that on their platform. If they want to help build them up, they want to help cooperate and help their business, help them, media and journalists. But if you don't, you're going to be like in hospice with your hand being held. That means your last moments of life. That means that's basically a subtle death threat in terms of a business frame, the frames of business, or the context they're putting it in, right? But yet, further in the article, they're denying even having said it, but yet they won't release yet, or haven't released yet, the minutes to the meeting. So whether that's fake news or real news, either way, for that shit to be at the top of my news feed, out of let's say just 20 things. 20, there's so many things that could be up there, right? For that to be there, whether that story is true or not, yeah, I got a kick out of that and realized just how dirty Facebook really is sometimes. They're really dirty cocksuckers, really, when you think about it. And, obviously I don't care to state the truth, because that's a true story, and that's just the way it is. It's also interesting, though, that the VPN that I use is set out of Australia sometimes, and I'd have to go back and wonder if that's one possible reason. But still, even if my VPN was set for Australia, for my location to be showing to come from out of Australia, which I notice the ads will come in from YouTube, for example, or other sites, or Google AdSense, Australian this and that, because it'll appear to those sites that I'm logging in from Australia and I'm surfing on the internet from Australia. But in any case, it's still that I have my listing with the the U.S. Press Association as a documentary filmmaker, as a journalist, and so on. So for that to show up there at the top, and that exact topic was kind of a subtle threat. Fake news or not, it's a threat. It's a psychological operation, or it's whatever. But it did, it helps me to realize that, these are some sick, demented people in any case. Joke or not, fake news or not, whether it's real or not, they're a sick, demented group there at Facebook. And I'm talking about Facebook, the company. And I think more and more of us are beginning to realize just how sick and demented and stupid these people really are. But, you know, what's funny is that I don't think most of them would last more than 2 weeks where I've been and where I'm at. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They don't have the street smarts to do that. So in the real world sense, when I see articles like that, and I think, you know what, sometimes when you can predict or sense the future, which I've done several times as an astrologer and done it in public and published these things before they've happened, the astrology or actual events and so on before they've happened. You can imagine that there can be an entire government, which I consider some governments to be pathetically idiotic, and some are really brilliant, some aren't. Some are really clever, but others get to this point. I mean, it's historically happened over and over, let's face it. You know, some governments, some nations have risen and fell, and so even the most brilliant or clever or capable historically have come to their demise or their stumbling place, which has sometimes changed the entire course of not the government, but the entire nation that is being governed by that. And one thing I noticed here, they stopped using Facebook as much. They started using Twitter for some of their news releases. I'm talking about our government, embassy. And they stopped releasing as much on the Facebook page. So that's one thing that I noticed, especially since the U.S. government appears to be, or at least Congress, had begun to investigate Facebook's censoring and Facebook's alleged harassment of American citizens based on their political views. And then you get into the fact that they did it again not too many weeks ago. So you had the grand old party, you had Congress again investigating these people. So we're just, what I've said for years is that to Georgian friends, don't depend on America, because America is a house divided against itself. The government is clearly, everyone can see, it's so easy, it's so out in the open now that they've been against each other for, I would say this, I was actually saying this because I was being invited to government-sponsored or government-involved events for the last 5 years. And I'm on the front line of some of these issues that are making international news, which is, Russian occupation of Georgia and so on. So I've said for the last 2 years, I've said, hey, there's a war going on, and I said it's the worst people on the planet that have, run intrigues against me have been fellow Americans, and I mean, what more can you do when you do something for a project, no salary for that, no compensation for that, no pay, and you do things historically that no one else has done, and you get this incredible intrigues from some secretive international organization, from what appears to be secret services of the United States in some cases, or fellow Americans. You get these incredible intrigues and interferences, and that tells me that, what I think a lot of Americans are seeing right now, which is you've got an American government that is deeply, in some sectors, in some ways, deeply sympathetic to the Kremlin or to social Marxism or to the communist or just the extreme leftists in general. And I've been saying that for the last couple of years, before all these things came more out in the open, before the last elections, because you could see it here. You could see who was behind this group that attached themselves to my former fiance, the way that they did it, the timing that they did it on, and how they did it, and what was happening here when we left an event and went down the street. There was, and I'll never forget, it's really strange, it sounds like bullshit, but it's true. They actually seemed and appeared to wait until we got there And then the woman started speaking about basically an ultra feminist type of way, and this group had been pumping that into Kate's mind. And for those of you that don't know the story, basically that was the cause of a great conflict between us. And it was after that event in Poland, and Poland was being attacked. Poland had opened up a monument to the families and the Jews that were lost, and the families that were considered heroes in Poland that had helped to save some of the Jews during World War II against persecution by the Nazis. And after that event, somebody tagged her in some inappropriate, what I call like pornographic art, but it was theater art, but it was not, even Facebook after the initial first complaint. And when I put it up next to the Georgian Patriarch, they immediately struck it down as against community standards. But on their part, they denied it at first. So there's a double standard, of course, with Facebook and what was really going on. And anytime you begin to get into higher public government place here, then there's another side that's trying to strike you down. And they're using soft power to do that. They're trying to mess with some aspect of your life because they hear, see, and watch everything you're doing. They study your psychology, your psychiatry, everything. I know, I've been told physically, face-to-face, been told this by this guy here that was a medical student with Rotaract. It's a cousin of the Patriarch's family. And he told me, he goes, you know, and one of these guys in Freemasonry here is a psychiatrist. I don't know if he's a professor or not, but his brother's a diplomat for Georgia in Scotland, which is, as a Freemason, his brother's a member of one of the most, the Mother Lodge of the world, 33rd degree. It's the Scottish Rite. It's the Mother Lodge. It's the biggest, it's the head Grand Lodge of the world. So yeah, he told me, he goes, we watch, there must be a reason you post why you post, and they're really mental over here, like they're more socialist, former communist, and so they'll sit around, they're masters at chess, they study you, they think, they watch, they try to out-scheme, they're like really foxy, they try to, you know, really use people, of course, but they also try to understand and think that they know what you're really thinking and doing, and if they don't, they're going to try to figure that out. And he told me this, you know, and I'm like, okay, well, so what they would do, you've got this other side, you've got the U.S. side, which is now boldly open. You know, you've got Facebook, that RT Today, Russia Today had talked about what Snowden had said. They've got individuals, groups, entire societies, entire nations of people that are targeted with teams of sociologists, social scientists of different kinds, for various ends to manipulate, research, or experiment on. And then I'd known from judicialwatch.org from way back, way back, by some abuses of a state judge then that we got a lawsuit filed against, and he lost his, they lost that case against the state of Missouri in court. I walked out. I didn't even finish it. Someone else that I'd walked in with to get it filed. I'm the one that initiated all of it initially. But that's all I wanted to do, you know, as long as that, and then I walked away. Didn't need to put any more of my time in. But they won, and the judge was deposed, and he's not a judge anymore. He lost his last election and his retirement package in that. And crazy to me, but one of my family members had used him for some trust work, which I think is very foolish. That's another story. But judicialwatch.org had said way back when that the Pentagon, in one of their articles, it's still got to be their Judicial Watch organization, because they would track abuses by the state, mainly judges. But they wrote way back when that the U.S. Pentagon had perception management programs, so that over the course of many months, targeted with certain news, targeted with this, that, the other, they would try to get you from maybe going this way to this way in support of whatever, you know, objective, whatever warfare objective that they had. And so I've been aware of that for a very long time, many years. And it's actually a perception management program. But what's interesting to me is I was talking to someone earlier in chat about my former wife, last wife, Yulia, from Ukraine. Father was Russian. He died when she was 12. Her mother was Ukrainian, is a Ukrainian scientist. I think she's probably now in the United States. I haven't kept up with her for a couple of years, but we divorced in February 2011. I finished the divorce here. We'd been separated 3 years. At the time of the divorce, she was with U.S. Army Airborne. She'd been all over Afghanistan. They had put her in a special program because of her ability. She's very, very good with languages, super intelligent as well. And they put her in a special program about, approaching these Afghan women. And so that the Special Forces, because she was Special Forces. Well, later she was Special Forces. That's what I was going to say next is after the divorce, she went in to Special Forces training and went in and served in Special Operations. But anyway, I had wondered for a time, because she had been targeted for years with specific ads through U.S. Army. So in other words, my laptop would be here, she'd be sitting over there, usually near me. We'd be working on eBay or working on some YouTube or whatever we were doing, mainly sales on eBay, books and CDs, and we'd put compilations together and things. And so what happens is they're targeting her for years, direct ads for U.S. Army. And, Lewis, you cracked me up. Oh, hell, there's a hole in the sidewalk here. I got somebody on film the other day. I went out to film the people begging in the streets here. Normal people, and the handicapped too, and elderly, but some normal people as well. I mean, younger. One of them was looks like with her grandmother. And so I had to be extra careful where I step, because one woman I saw step into a little crack and a hole in the sidewalk, ripped a triangular area in her denim jeans. Lewis, man, that cracks me up. That's funny. But so back to the story with when I wrote A Storm Warning for Israel, spring summer 2017, and published that March 17, 2007, out of Panama City, Panama. It was about a 28-page ebook report. It was down to the day accurate. I think, personally, since that time, he still got that mojo. That's funny. I actually looked that word up so I would know, like, official. We know what that means, but sometimes I'll just look it up to be sure, because I think it's a little effective being out of my own language and culture for so long, right? And when I'm talking with people that aren't from an English-speaking country, I'm always checking that to make sure that I've not just going by how I learned it or by memory what something means. Mojo goes back to the voodoo, according to one definition. And I've been studying a little bit about the voodoo lately, because some of my pursuit of magic or the metaphysics came about in a very serious pursuit. But some of that I look at on the level of being an like amateur scientist or some sort of prankster, or just a kid that's curious about a new toy. So we'd get this and experiment, run, and I guess that's why some people will approach it. It's like experimenting, and that's why I love the Chaos Magic page so much. It's so funny, the jokes they put out. But anyway, back to what I was saying though. I think in Panama, when I wrote that prediction on Israel, I think that got a lot of interest in the I was communicating with Barry Chamish. Walking and talking in this late is not working so good for me because it's a bit dark now. But anyway, Barry Chamish was an incredible investigative journalist in Israel. He was more popular and better known than his own government. Barry Chamish wrote a lot of investigative stuff on Israel. You can imagine what his life was like. But he was he had been a soldier with the Israeli Defense Force. So he'd been a soldier in the Israeli army. And I think he ended up spending time in the U.S. or Canada. Actually, I'm 48, my friend. Lewis, I'm 48. That's... well, I don't know. Here we go with... it's getting more dark where I'm walking, and hopefully I'm not going to have too much luck with this unless I get under a street light. Well, anyway, who needs lighting? I'm not out here for great visual effects. That is funny, though. I'm reading Lewis's comments for those that are wondering what I'm laughing about. That's funny. But yeah, with Barry Chamish, he had a lot of articles. Me personally, I love the early days on the internet. If we can even call that early days, it could go all the way back to when I lived in Blue Springs and was in high school. We were calling that, I guess, the beginning days of the internet. Man, back then, though, it was a pain in the ass. Internet was more like TextNet. Like you guys remember all that text and programming and anyway. But even in 2007, I would say that to me that was still the early days of the internet. So I was reading a lot of Barry's stuff out of Israel or the U.S. I think he had to leave and go to the U.S. or Canada. And isn't that a trend, though, right? You start telling the truth, you get into that journalist stuff, you start writing about what's really going on, you're probably going to be packing your shit and moving to another country before long. I joke, but that's the fact. Anyway, that's what happened to Chamish. C-H-A-M-I-S-H. Barry. B-A-R-R-Y. That's his first name. So Barry Chamish is who I wrote on some questions. But I'll tell you the truth. The real deal is that it was just all over the news. It's like they're going to have war, and the news was all about Israel and Iran and all that. And so I'm like, Israel's close to Cyprus. If I was thinking about those little kids, nobody thinks about, like, little kids didn't choose to be Jewish or Palestinian or Arabic or whatever the hell they are. There's probably a whole international group there, I'm sure, too. Anyway, so because of that, I decided, and plus we were under the brainwash that Israel is God's chosen people, God's chosen blah, blah, blah. And I was still under that brainwash back then, in 2007. But it was all over the damn news. And I'm like, well, I looked at the chart for the nation of Israel, found out exactly when they were ordered in court, in their case, as a nation. So it was a legal act. When that gavel hit was when Israel was born legally. So it's a great chart to use for predictive work because it has an actual exact birth time and birth date, so that we know it's modern, easy to run in the software and pull the charts up and run all the searches and everything. But the charts for that were so clear. There was like double, triple, quadruple grand crosses in there. There was a magical rectangle on August 1st. August 1st is an occult holiday, and then everything is calmed down in the chart by then. And so it was really easy to see that they were going to go to war. There was a 1 or 2 day grand cross at the end of March 2007. So on March 17, I put out the prediction basically in 2 paragraphs, even though the ebook itself was like 28 pages. In the first 2 paragraphs, I got right to the point and said, here's when it's going to start, approximately end of June or so. And I said it's going to basically end with signatories on August 1st. And it did. But about the end of the March 29, with that 1 grand cross, one Russian general was like, oh, there's going to be war at the end of March, da-da-da-da-da, and all that shit. It was bullshit. But what they did do on that grand cross in Israel's chart at the end of March, a bunch of Arab nations guys got together, the heads of these Arab nations. They might have met in Syria, but anyway, those guys got together and said Israel, they threatened Israel. They said give up some land or face war. And apparently, instead of fighting with Iran, they fought Lebanon. And apparently, according to the astrology, that shit was real. Let me explain what I mean by that. here in Georgia, what I noticed on their war when I went back and studied it in 2008, which is about 10 years ago, right? When there's no stress, and there's especially no stress at the time the president's chart, as an astrologer, as a human being with common sense, you're like, you know what? These motherfuckers planned that shit, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and they had a plan, my friend. Anyway, I may be just joking about that. You'll have to make up your own mind about that. One can study the charts on their own. Damn few of you will be able to do that, unfortunately. But anyway, those are some insider comments, you could say, off the cuff. But I've known it for a long time. I mean, that's been my opinion for a long time. It's not that I've known it, because I could be wrong about that. That observation, that joke. But anyway, that is interesting, because with Israel, they were messed up in the chart. So when you see that much stress, and so there's different ways to predict with this type of astrology. I like Magi astrology because you can use planetary geometry. You can, because it's a lunar-based calculation for the chart, not solar, not like Western. You know, there's some validity with using the Western as well. But I like Magi astrology because it's a lunar-based system, and so that's a lunar-based chart, and it's much more, in my opinion, it's much more accurate. And I love the lunar-based calculation of those charts because you can use grand crosses, grand trines, like I mentioned earlier, the golden rectangle, you know, which is a rectangle. And that's how it was so easy, because it was an occult holiday on August 1st, and because the golden rectangle was there, it's so easy just to say, you know what, they're going to use that to sign some sort of peace deal, because you got these illuminous guys that are high-level military and government. They're going to say, there it is, they're following astrologers too. They'll sign the peace then. All the stressful, you know, grand cross, double, triple, quadruple stuff that was going on was finished. It's that simple. Now, sometimes I've been able to make these last predictions that I've listed on my website, just knowing. You know, when I wrote about Russia April 8th, which turned out to be true, because let's face it, when 4 of your ICBMs go off and explode, that's humiliating. When the West comes into Syria with a barrage of missiles into an alleged chemical factory after Russia has said this is our red line, and then they do nothing, that's what I would consider humiliating. And so that prediction given on April 8th was just you know, watching the news, post to Facebook, that's it. Anyway, yeah, I'll make this comment though, since Lewis had wrote that. What I can say about Anna is that we had met. First was, you know, Miriam, her sister Anna McDonald's, and I don't think there's any photos posted with Anna there. So that had started, like, from the time until we last met. Anna and I had last met in April. That's 16 months. So in Georgian culture, that's quite a long time to be meeting someone. And when I met her mother in March of 2017, and then I'd met her 1 year exactly, almost to the day, at the same location, Luca Polare, on March 2018. And I think that, you know, it's different culture, different mentality, different mindset, and not everything is clear. And it's a complicated situation in a few different ways. But I've had like interest in Anna for a few years because she's posted on Facebook. I've seen her post ice skating photos, videos. I've seen her little, you know, when she was in university, I'd see something like the parties. I saw photos. I've basically known her life from what she shared on Facebook for some years. As an astrologer, we actually made first contact and chat through an astrology forum. and I helped her through several very difficult times for her, because she'd show up on the Facebook in, no sleep. Obviously, she'd been in tears, she'd been upset, all this stuff like that. It's like, oh, well, there's a Saturn-Chiron clash to your natal moon, and those hurt, those are hard. But you're lucky, yours is only 3 days in length. Everything will be great in a week or two, and you're going to have a super great autumn. That's how it began. And beyond the first initial, like, well, here's your chart, and here's what Magi astrology or fixed stars astrology or Vedic astrology is really all about, from the best, most accurate sources and techniques or authors that I can find out of the tons and tons of bullshit on the market that surround the whole field and practice of astrology. It's most of it, 99% is bullshit. That's where I would leave that. But I've worked long and hard to find and test what can be, in my opinion, the most accurate techniques, methods, sources, books, and the very few in the world that I consider to be worth putting any time and effort into checking out. That would include KRS Astrology Channel, Vedic Astrology Channel on YouTube, and Pandit Parsai, and DK, his son, for the Vedic side of it. But what's interesting is that the fixed stars is very, very deep, but there's the new star stories out on Astro.com, because Bernadette Brady's charts are what I've used for years, but now her and her partner have kind of a merged, a partner created chart that has a little bit unique and additional information in there, especially on vocation, for example. So that's always interesting to have the additional insight. I found that to be extremely accurate. And unfortunately, it's a kind of astrology that's not very often mentioned or even known by astrologers. It's just not, and it should be, because there's a depth of insight and additional information that's just really priceless. And that's why I like to also provide those charts and different, couple of different sources on how to interpret those, especially. But the Vedic life predictions is the only thing that I'm focused on, planets and the houses, and then drawing up those charts by hand, based on the planets' positions, including the moon especially, on the Magi Astrology's astrogeometry software, because it's based on those calculations and those planetary degrees and placements in the solar signs for just the location. It's based on NASA's updated ephemeris, and it changed the house lords and the position of the moon. So some of the predictive work that was done by the excellent one out of India was changed a bit, and it's more accurate. I'd say about 90% of it's still the same, because it didn't alter it that much, but you change the moon and you change the house lords, and anyone can go in and see that that does change some significant predictions in the, at least, let's say if we're going to use 7 planets, 7 different sets of, at least minimum. That's not including the different combinations that can take place in the houses. So in other words, if you've got 2 planets, 3 planets, 4 planets in the same house, you can look at what they'd be doing alone or together, and in any combinations, and get some idea of what life predictions may unfold, may come into your life. So that's a whole other set of data, but it's usually inaccurate by most people's perception, because they're not using an updated ephemeris, and if you don't hand calculate the Vedic Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart, then only in 10 to 15% of the cases, if you're using a software, is it going to be accurate. And as I just said, I use it for years, and then when I use NASA's updated ephemeris for the positioning of the planets, which is what Magi Astrology's software is using, it changed the position of the moon and the house lords. So if you're into that deep, you need to know that. And the Star Guide to Love and Marriage, it talks about the dosha, or the problem of if you've got Mars and Saturn in the wrong position, in a certain position. It's known throughout India by people that are into astrology that if you're afflicted in such a way by those 2 planets in those, where they're placed in the Vedic Rashi chart, then that's such an extreme problem that you'd have to be doing some remedial measures about it, or just be aware of it, so that you'll know that your life is has that kind of effect, that area, from that. Anyway, I didn't plan to make this long of a video, but what I wanted to point out was that I think since making that prediction on Israel very accurately and successfully, and I've made other more predictions since then, privately, and at least 20 in public, documented in advance, published in advance, accurate. I think, Yulia was targeted, clearly. There's no question about that. She was targeted. Then she said to Tatiana told me her mother had said she was in a secret program with the U.S. Pentagon. She'd asked to be a part of that. Anyway, it could be that, there's some kind of interest in myself based on that ability to, make such predictions on war. And anyway, that's it. You get to the point where you realize that there are interests that if you had that ability, there's going to be a group of interests out there that don't want that ability to be in use. I think, it's like Adolf Hitler in World War II is said to have recruited or eliminated psychic talent, occult talent. And that's what part of the Frabato story about allegedly Franz Bardon in real life, who was not only a stage magician but an occult magician, is about. And the story goes that he didn't join a Black Lodge. Well, this is all fictional stuff, right? But Franz Bardon was a true occult magician. But what's interesting is I was watching black magician E.A. Koetting, one of his videos the other day, and what he's stating is that now they are, according to him, a lot of Freemason lodges in the United States that are opening up to the practice of black magic. So they're starting some black lodges, if I understood him correctly. And it's not really good to take my word for that. I think that's what he said on one of his live stream chats, video chats on Facebook here within the last week or so. If that's true, then you can expect, I think that would be kind of, I'm not a black magician. I'm not a Luciferian, for example, and I'm not a black magician. So, but if that's true, what Koetting is saying, and it's interesting that great predictive Western astrologer Josh Van Dyke, who's a friend here on my Facebook page, and I comment on some of his posts, he's commented on some of my posts. We've had exchanges, email exchanges before and things like that. He's been on a lot of radio programs and so on for his predictive astrology. And Josh already talked about that. Josh had said, hey, you're going to see more and more about the Baphomet, about Luciferianism, Satanism, all this stuff like that. He's right, because, to hear that from Koetting on black lodges now coming in, if Koetting is right, then you can see where the mushrooming of that is a whole different type of ethic that would be, I would consider to be, there's a creative side to it, sure, but there's also an extremely destructive side with basically an ethic of do as thou wilt, in a certain sense. So, it's like, I think one of the titles, Belial without a master. I mean, there's the positive sense of that, of not being controlled or enslaved or imprisoned by someone or something. But then there's the possible negative side, or a negative aspect of that, of just everything goes. There is, kind of more the anarchist side of things in total. And so you get into the questionable thing. It's like, what kind of ideology is that there's, really, if he's right, in establishing? Anyway, that's enough of that. Anyone can go look that up. But the reason this topic comes to my mind is because of Franz Bardon. So, and if you had the ability, for example, to see through the schemes of some government, or if you had the ability to predict certain things that maybe some military or some general didn't want to be even, if it was a secret thing and you said, well, here's the astrology on that, and everybody's like, oh, well, we're looking there, and it becomes a very dangerous thing. Because, as I said, the whole story about Frabato and Franz Bardon, that's F-R-A-N-Z, Bardon is B-A-R-D-O-N. The whole story is that Hitler himself, being allegedly a practicing black magician or pacted with a demon or demons and so on, which is allegedly where Mein Kampf came from, my struggle, as my demon struggles or your demon struggles for you, you should struggle for your demon, blah, blah, blah. All this weirdness, which is based in the black magic, or his particular brand of black magic, right? Then you get into this Black Lodge story where they either recruit you or they killed you. And so that's a little bit of what the Frabato story is about. I've listed that book on my Facebook as one of my, one of the interesting books that I have read, because it's also an audio book on YouTube. I don't know if it's like 9 or 10 hours, but it's a very interesting story about Franz Bardon in a fictional format right around pre-World War II. I'll close by saying this. When I was on the plane with Donald Rumsfeld, former defense minister of the United States, both youngest and oldest, and I think the only one in history who served twice as a defense minister of the United States of America. His daughters were sitting to my left. His son was sitting behind me. We were flying into Tbilisi. Nana came and was picking me up at the airport that night. They came in the motorcade, of course, with guards or police or whatever. But on the jet, we had talked openly and freely. I talked with his daughters, and I didn't know exactly. I thought that was him, but I wasn't sure. And then when he came back, I knew for sure. Plus, I asked her, too, before that, actually. I said, is that who I think that is? I said, there's the quote about knowns and what we know we don't know, and what we don't know what we don't know, unknown unknowns. Yeah, that's him. That's a famous quote. That's Donald Rumsfeld, and he's got a book out now with that in the title. Anyway, she was reading a book called A Garden of Beasts, one of his daughters. And I forgot the author's name right off bat, but it's about the idea of right in that time in Berlin or in pre-World War II Germany. All the Nazism was coming in, and some people knew what was going on, a lot of people didn't. And that is that half the political prisoners all over Europe were being shuffled away and put into the death camps, right? The hardcore, exhausting labor camps, death camps. And a lot of them were just political prisoners. Anyway, the whole theme of this A Garden of Beasts was that they had to come up with their own financing as kind of working diplomats in that time, I think. And that was a very dangerous time and place for them to go in as diplomats and to try to do that, because people were being disappeared. And of course, this is pre-World War II Nazi Germany, and I think I think the description of that was, yeah, you had to come up with your own money, you had to come up with your own financing to do this diplomatic type of, this envoy type of work. Anyway, anybody can look that up, A Garden of Beasts. It's a big book she had and was reading, and I was thinking, does Donald know who I am? There was only 30 people on that flight. Of all the flights I've ever taken, there was less amount of people in my life than it was with the Rumsfeld family. So it was some months after that, I believe maybe 3 or 4 months after that, that Katuno Polari had approached me through Facebook, asked to meet, and as a lawyer with the Georgia Ministry of Defense, they started, and had asked me to help with the project. Anyway, have a nice night.